A prisoner was found strung up inside of his cell at HMP The Mount. But was this a case of prison justice? Well, there was an investigation into this death, and the report has just been published. But the inmate in question was actually an illegal migrant who was serving life for murdering a British father of 6 who was 42-year-old, and he stabbed him to death. But whilst inside of prison, this said illegal migrant got into an altercation with some of the prisoners over a game of pool, and he attacked one of the inmates, and the inmates were out looking for revenge. And then mysteriously, on association, it wasn't after bang up where the pads are all locked, where you would think if someone was going to do away with themselves, they would do it after association during the night or when the door was locked. But this actually happened whilst the doors were unlocked. So people, was this a case of a revenge attack, prison justice, or was this self-inflicted? But I will talk about the case now, because with the report just coming out, it is across a few media outlets. When I've been looking for some stories today, I've seen it pop up on quite a few. But I do remember this at the time, because I remember quite a few emails and inboxes about this, saying a prisoner has been strung up inside of HMP The Mount. But I didn't have any definite on this at the time, so I didn't want to do the story back then. But now that it's came to light and it has came out in the report, but I will tell you what it does say in the report a little bit further on. But the headlines in some of these articles that I found is convicted killer who murdered dad of 6 found dead in prison cell. Murtab Zemichael stabbed father of 6 Gary Briscoe to death at a hostel. So this did happen in 2013 when he committed this murder against Gary Briscoe. So the convicted murderer serving a life sentence was found dead in his prison cell. An Eritrean national, so Eritrea is a country in East Africa, entered the UK illegally. He was found hanged at HMP The Mount, which is in Hertfordshire, and is a Category C men's prison, which holds up to 1,000 inmates. And it has come under scrutiny more recently because of the overcrowding crisis, the understaffing, and the prison, like most prisons in the UK at the moment, is a fucking absolute shithole. So a report following an investigation into his death has now been published by the Prisons and Probation Ombudsman, which investigates all deaths in custody. And Zemichael, who was 52 when he died, was found guilty at the Old Bailey in 2014 of murdering father of 6 Gary Briscoe, who was 42, with family in Rochdale. He grew up in Accrington, Lancashire. Mr. Briscoe was stabbed to death by Zemichael in June 2013 in his room at a hostel in Whitechapel, East London, where both he and Zemichael were staying. He suffered multiple knife wounds, including serious stab injuries to his neck, and was pronounced dead at the scene. Police launched a manhunt, and Zemichael was arrested a fortnight later, having slept rough since the killing. He was jailed for life with a minimum term of 15 years. But he's never to be released from prison. Well, he was in a body bag, but never to be released alive from prison. So Michael, the newly published report reveals, was transferred to HMP The Mount in July 2018. And at the time of the murder, he was said to have been diagnosed with complex psychological and mental health issues, but the report reveals he worked with mental health staff and the psychiatrist whilst in prison. He displayed no behaviour of concern, and his condition was said to have been well managed to the point that his medication had been reduced to a very low dose. Does that sound like somebody who was about to commit suicide? He was said to have settled in well and was described in a report as a model prisoner and working in the kitchens. But the report details an incident just months before his death. In March 2023, he was involved in an altercation with another prisoner over a game of pool and lost his privileges as a result. He was said to have struck the other prisoner with a pool cue, and that other prisoner was extremely unhappy, not just by getting hit by any prisoner, but an illegal migrant who had his foot inside the prison system. He'd been in for a while, and he thought he was untouchable. He had a dispute over a game of pool. And what does he do? Whacks him with the pool cue. And in prison, as you can imagine, when somebody attacks you, you're out for revenge. But when someone attacks you who's an illegal migrant, who shouldn't have been in the UK to start with, who murdered a defenceless father of 6 children, then people might be out for justice or revenge. And like I've said, I did hear back when this happened that it was going to be a murder case, but if it was that type of case, I'm not saying it is, then maybe it was made to look as though he'd done it himself. So despite that, the report said he was said to be well behaved and staff had no concerns, adding more weight to the prison justice. On June the 16th of that year, Michael was said to have spent most of his day in his cell, but he did come and go freely because the pads were unlocked all day long. But there was no CCTV of anyone entering his cell. They couldn't see anything. There was no CCTV on the day of the death. I wonder why. So it says fellow prisoners had alerted staff at 4 p.m. that they couldn't get into his cell. And that's the reason why I was saying again, it was on association. The doors were unlocked, which some of the Spurs in different prisons in Category C jails, they were opened most of the day. And he obviously had some friends inside of the prison that went to check on him. They probably looked through the flap and they couldn't see anything. The flap, it was dark behind the flap. They tried to open the door and they couldn't get in. So they alerted the staff. But the staff managed to open the door and he was discovered behind it. And he was pronounced dead just after 5 p.m. So the staff were alerted at 4 p.m. 5 p.m. he was pronounced dead. Immediately, because it was on association, there was a major incident reported because they didn't know whether or not it was done maliciously, whether somebody had strung him up or made it look as though he'd done it himself, because staff were not concerned about his well-being or about his risk of taking his own life or self-harm. And Mr. Usher said in the report, Mr. Michael had never been subject to suicide and self-harm monitoring at the Mount, and his death came as a shock to the staff, which was more of the reason why there was a massive investigation, because the staff were saying this is out of character. And like I've said, they tried to look at CCTV. There wasn't any. There was no witnesses that came forward saying anybody had went into his cell. And Yes, I best watch what I'm saying. But the altercation that he'd had earlier on, not that day, it was earlier on in that year, there was questions around that, and also there was questions around the fact that Gary, the murder victim, did have friends who were in the criminal fraternity. Not that I was saying he was a criminal, but with him being in hostels and different places like that, he did know people and he did have friends who were very upset by this murder, who had actually ended up in prison themselves. So whether or not they spread the word to look out for this said prisoner, this illegal migrant who took the life of one of their friends. So the investigation found no evidence that his behaviour or presentation had ever indicated he was a raised risk of taking his own life, and certainly none in the days before his death, which came as a great shock to staff. A coroner at a subsequent inquest gave a conclusion of suicide, which has just came out, which is why it's took so long since the death. But I just thought I would bring that on here because, like I say, I did hear about it at the time. There was a lot of rumours going around about foul play, but there will be no charges against anybody for prison justice because it's been concluded at the coroner's report. A subsequent inquest has given a conclusion of suicide. Case closed. No court cases. On your way, boys. And that, people, is the story I'm bringing you today because, like I say, prisoner found strung up on association. Doesn't happen very often. You never hear of people taking their lives, prisoners taking their lives whilst association is ongoing, for the simple fact, if that's what they were intending to do and they didn't want to be in prison no longer, and the only way they could see as escaping prison is taking out their own lives. But if you're going to take your own life inside of prison, you wouldn't be doing it on association because you could have been found and they could have saved you. But I'm going to leave that one there for now. People, hopefully you are enjoying the content. Hopefully you did like that story. And if you did, remember to comment, like and subscribe. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your week ahead. Stay safe.